So greetings all. Thanks for coming out. My name is Paul Espinosa, and I'm the president of the Eric W. Gritsch Memorial Fund. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 6th annual Gritsch Symposium. We would like to thank you all for coming out this morning, and based on the learning of our two presenters and the title of their talks, as you'll see, I know you are sure to get some good intellectual exercise today. Randy will properly introduce each of our speakers. But speaking of intellectual exercise, I have been trying to get into shape for today by reading Dr. Eire's wonderful tome. You can see Reformations of 2016. If you haven't gotten this, please do. It's an education in itself. You can see how far I've gotten, right? People think librarians just get to read all day. It's not true. So just on one last note, I just want to say that the Gritsch Fund and you, our very helpful supporters, can, I think, feel a real sense of accomplishment this morning, knowing that Eric, I am sure, would have been proud that we are able to bring such a distinguished professor of Dr. Eire's stature, as well, and perhaps most importantly, a junior and younger scholar with such promise as Thomas, who is the recipient of our first Eric W. Gritsch Memorial Fellowship Fund, and who has already put those funds to good use studying in Rome already. And so, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Randy to introduce Dr. Eire. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Randy Donaldson, and I'm a member of the Gritsch Fund Board. I have the pleasure of introducing our two speakers today. First up is Carlos Eire. His academic biography tells us that he's currently T. Morrison Riggs Professor of History and Religious Studies at Yale University. Yet his scholarly and personal biography, as he relates it on Amazon.com, is even more informative and fascinating. Professor Eire is a teacher, scholar, and author whose published works span a broad spectrum from the Reformation to the Cuban Revolution. Among his works are such diverse and tantalizing titles as A Very Brief History of Eternity, Waiting for Snow in Havana, Learning to Die in Miami. Together, his published works tell the story of a man who fled Cuba as an unaccompanied 11-year-old and is today a respected scholar and author who lists his proudest accomplishment as being declared as an enemy of the Cuban state. This morning, Professor Eire will speak to us on bodies that defy the laws of nature, miracles as Catholic resistance to the Protestant disenchantment of the world. Professor Eire.
Thank you all for being here, and I want to thank Bonnie Bronx and Paul Espinosa for being so patient with me as we tried to arrange for this. And I want to thank them, of course, and anyone else involved for this event, which I've been really looking forward to for a long time. My talk today is, how to best summarize it? As you all know, 2017 was the 500th anniversary of Luther's posting of the 95 Theses. So there were a lot of celebrations of the Reformation. The question I always got, no matter where I was invited to talk, is, well, what difference does all this make? So my talk is about this difference, right? About what I think is one of the most significant changes brought about to Western culture by the Protestant Reformation. But in order to do that, of course, you have to look at the other side. You have to look at the Catholic side. Hence, the subject, bodies that defy the laws of nature. Miracles as Catholic resistance to the Protestant disenchantment of the world. Miracles, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not, miracles were really at the center of the religious change brought about in the 16th century. So how do we get there? How do we go there? prelude to the subject I'm about to cover, of course, is the Protestant Reformation. And here you have a Catholic engraving from the 1580s showing all the major reformers trying to destroy the Catholic Church. Naturally, this is how Catholics view the whole deal. And among the characters here, over on the left is Luther. On the ground, he's fallen down, is Johann Oecolampadius, the reformer of Basel. And over to the right, you have Calvin. And of course, they're all being held by devils. Of course. Very Catholic. But what was the most profound change brought about by the Protestant Reformation? We have an expert who told us 100 years ago that it was the disenchantment of the world. And that's Max Weber, the great-granddad of modern sociology. Disenchantment is a very poor translation of the German Entzauberung, because Zauber is magic. So what Weber is really saying is that what the Reformation did is it took magic out of the world. And magic is an insult. Magic is never good in the 16th century. Even though most courts have alchemists and wizards and magicians and astrologers and so on, when Protestants in the 16th century were speaking about Zauber, speaking about, hello? Go ahead.
Reinforcements.
Go out? Yeah, sorry. Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay.
Magic.
Is that better? Yes, yeah, I can hear the echo, so I'm okay. Anyway, Zauber points to something that's phony, it's hollow, ridiculous, even evil. And there you have none other than the famous or infamous Dr. Faustus, because of course, all magic has a demonic association. All of the major Protestant reformers, beginning with Luther, argued that miracles that one reads about in the Bible actually did happen. Of course they did. Red Sea parted, Jesus changed water into wine, and so on and so forth. But when the last of the 12 apostles died, miracles ceased. They were no longer necessary. The argument went something like this. Jesus and the apostles needed miracles to convince the world that Jesus' message and his incarnation and God's incarnation was in fact true, genuine. They needed miracles. But after that first generation, now that the seeds of belief had been planted, you didn't need those miracles anymore. And actually the greatest miracle was the fact that the church grew and grew and grew without miracles. So here's what Luther had to say. And you can read it. I'm going to turn this around a little bit so I can face the text. Those visible works are simply signs for the ignorant, unbelieving crowd and for their sakes that are yet to be attracted. But as for us who know already what we do know and believe in the gospel, what do we want them for? They're unnecessary. Down in Switzerland, Reformed Protestantism also took the same tack, but with an additional principle that Lutherans rejected. Lutherans rejected the Swiss Reformed separation of spirit and matter. But Zwingli's argument was not just that these miracles have ceased, but that material things, worldly things, are an obstacle. And he had two principles. One, in Latin finitum, known as capax infiniti, which means the finite cannot contain or convey the infinite. And the other one was quantum sensui tribueris tantum spiritui detraxeris. The physical detracts from the spiritual. So if you're looking for physical miracles, like healings, for instance, the most common kind of miracle in the New Testament, healings, forget it. God made the world the way it is, with its laws, and he only fiddles with those laws when he has a message to get across. And John Calvin is more the same. We may also fitly remember Satan has his miracles, which, though they are deceitful tricks rather than true powers, are such a sort as to mislead the simple-minded and untutored. Now notice already twice Luther and Calvin saying miracles are for uneducated, dumb people. Truly enlightened don't need this kind of stuff. And then, of course, these miracles, they all realized the Catholic Church, in their lifetime, was still trying to argue that it was the true church because it had miracles, and they did not. Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, they didn't have miracles. So look, who's the true church? That was the argument. But Calvin would say that it was idolatry that's been nourished by wonderful miracles, yet these are not sufficient to sanction the superstition either of magicians or idolaters. Again, casting aspersions on Catholic belief in miracles as magical, maybe perhaps demonic. Satan too has his miracles. And then we're about to jump into stories of three Catholic saints from the 16th and 17th century who had corporeal, bodily miracles of an extreme kind. All of them monastics. The Catholic belief in these miracles we're about to examine is that holiness, a sanctified, holy life as a monastic, brings you closer to God, and that also has a physical effect on you. But Luther, of course, rejected monasticism and rejected the whole idea that one could become so holy that one could have union with God and experience these physical miracles. And the first time I ran into this quote from Luther, it really shocked me. He's really doing an exegesis of the Song of Songs. The point of which is, yes, Song of Songs is about the relationship between the human soul and God. But it's not an even relationship. The human soul is so corrupt that it's like a prostitute. And God is like a virtuous man who very kindly consents to marrying this fallen woman and marries the prostitute even as she's still practicing her trade. So it's an uneven relationship. Christ is full of grace, life, salvation. The soul is full of sins, death, and damnation. Here, this rich and divine bridegroom, Christ marries this poor, wicked whore, redeems her from all her evil, and adorns her with all his goodness. However numerous, sacred, and arduous they may be, these works of monks and nuns in God's sight are in no way whatever superior to the works of a farmer laboring in the field or of a woman looking after her home. Forget that special category of human existence. Everybody is in exactly the same situation. And there's nothing better than being a Christian. Just being a Christian is being a Christian. No special status for anybody. But my argument is that Catholics from very early on catch on to this Protestant argument against miracles and Protestant argument against mystical union with God. And what you begin to see in the 16th century and peaking in the 17th century is a Catholic emphasis on miracles that are so extreme that they can be used as polemic, as an argument against the quote-unquote falsehood of the Protestant Reformation. Item number 1, the miracle of levitation, of floating or hovering or sometimes flying. The 16th and 17th century are the peak period for flying in Europe before the invention of the airplane. No doubt about it. And here you have an engraving of St. Teresa of Avila levitating in the presence of witnesses. And this is what I find is very common, these accounts of levitation in the 16th and 17th centuries, that there were always witnesses, hundreds of witnesses. And important witnesses too. Right here she is levitating, obviously at Mass, and the priest celebrating Mass is a bishop of Avila. Teresa also levitated the very first time she met another saint, St. John of the Cross. It's the only case I know of 2 individuals levitating together. But this event was considered so important that there are 2 paintings of this event, and this one hangs in the convent where this supposedly took place. But if you notice, the miracle, this levitation, is so extreme that St. John of the Cross is taking the chair along with him as he goes up. It's not just a body. Right? And these are Teresa's words, what it feels like. You know, I'll summarize for you, so you're going to have to read the whole thing. But, you know, it seemed a great, tremendous force was lifting me up from beneath. You realize and indeed see that you are being carried away and you know not where. And then when I tried to resist these raptures, it seemed to me that a tremendous force was lifting me up from beneath my feet, a force so powerful that I can't think of anything comparable, for it overcame me with such greater intensity than any other spiritual experience, and left me feeling torn to shreds. She would complain that these levitations left her very sore, so sore that she couldn't even pick up her quill. Couldn't do this. She also ordered the nuns to hold her down or pull her down. And since she was abbess, they had to obey her, and they tried. And there are so many accounts of this, some of them very funny, of the nuns trying to hold her down and being unable to. She just whoop, goes up. Very common for these, let's call them counter-Reformation saints. And I'm using that term deliberately, counter-Reformation, in the sense that this is, you know, counter Protestantism. Ignatius Loyola was viewed several times levitating in his room, and not just levitating, but as the description below lets you know, glowing. And notice there are always witnesses in these engravings, and in paintings too, that tend to be witnesses. It became a very common subject in Baroque art. Paintings commissioned to depict saints of various orders, religious orders. I'm just going to give you a sample of 2 other saints. This is a medieval saint, St. Anthony of Padua, levitating. You can see the shadow under his body. And it's more than levitation. I mean, he's seeing the Virgin Mary, the infant Jesus, and then there's this celestial orchestra with very beautiful 17th century Italian musical instruments. And I won't tell you the comments I get from students when I show this slide, because they're all verging on or crossing the line over into blasphemy. This painting hangs in the Louvre Museum in Paris. It's by Murillo. We don't know who this Franciscan is who's being depicted here, but you know, he's obviously levitating, and he's got witnesses to the left and angels to the right, because what has happened, the story in this painting is this Franciscan was assigned to kitchen duty, but he went into a mystical ecstasy and started floating and couldn't do his kitchen work, so angels showed up to do his work for him. This is as Catholic as it gets. And this is as un-Protestant, right, as it gets. And here's Teresa of Avila trying to explain what's going on. I would like, with the help of God, to be able to describe the difference between union and rapture, or elevation, or what they call flight of the spirit, or transport, which are all one. I mean, these are all different names for the same thing, which is also called ecstasy. Because none of these elevations and levitations are willed. It's not like any of these individuals says, okay, time to levitate. No. They go into ecstasy, and the levitation is a side effect of the ecstasy. St. Teresa will actually beg God to stop it. And according to her, and according to the testimony of her fellow nuns, it did stop. So Teresa actually has like an argument with God and says, why are you doing this to me? What's the purpose of this? And it ends. She's the only case I know of somebody who has this argument with God and wins. It's always involuntary. And perhaps there is no ecstasy of Teresa's that's better known than this one, the transverberation, where an angel shows up and pierces her. It's a vision. It means she sees it, but it's also a physical experience, right? It involves body and spirit. It involves the vision. And this is the earliest depiction we have of this event, which she describes in her autobiography. And there's the text. And it bears reading in full. I saw in the angel's hand a long dart of gold. Now notice, a dart is about this long, but the artists are turning it into a spear. And at the iron's point, there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to me to be thrusting it at times into my heart and to pierce my very inner depths. When he drew it out, he seemed to draw them out also, and to leave me all aflame with a great love of God. The pain was so great that it made me moan, and yet so surpassing was the sweetness of this excessive pain that I could not wish to be rid of it, and the soul could not be satisfied with nothing less than God. The pain is not bodily, but spiritual, although the body has a share in it. It's very typical of Teresa. She'll confuse the hell out of it. Try to make sense out of it. She's balancing opposites constantly. So this is the earliest painting of this from 1614, when she was beatified. She was not yet Saint Teresa. But notice that Strozzi, the artist, is depicting Teresa as praying to a crucifix. There is no divine presence in this representation. It's just the angel, whom she identified as a cherub, one of the cherubim, because he was so beautiful. And there's a later painting from 1672. There you see the flame on the tip. But now you see three angels. And this is the only painting I know of this by a woman artist, Josefa de Obidos, Portuguese artist. I'm sure you all have seen this image before. It is perhaps the most famous Baroque sculpture there is. And it's by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, commissioned for a chapel in Rome for a very powerful family, the Cornaro family. And that's the setting, in case you have never seen it. It's just amazing. That's a funerary chapel. The Cornaros are buried right there in front of the altar. And there are statues on either side of the members of the Cornaro family looking at the scene. But why pick this? It's kind of odd. Oh, Cardinal Cornaro asked for this because, you see, this embodies, literally, it embodies this Catholic belief in the possibility of the human body taking part in these ecstasies. And there's, again, repeat what I've already read to you, and you have already read on the screen that the pain is so great and spiritual, but it's also physical. And I'll show you a few more renditions of this event, and notice how different artists portray it differently. And these two 18th century paintings, you have an element of violence that you don't see to the same extent in some of the earlier renditions. Mazzani's angel, who looks, as I always say, it looks like an American fraternity boy, is attacking Teresa, who is already in a swoon. The right-hand side, Tony's depiction, it's like the little angel, the cherub. He has a dart, that's the correct thing, and the dart has the flame on the tip, but it's as if he's performing very careful surgery on Teresa, and she looks more than a little bit worried. And then you have renditions of this that are not actual renditions of the event, but are emblems. And I wish I had more time to talk to you about emblems. 17th century, they become very popular. They're like encoded images that represent things, messages, usually multiple messages. But notice what's happened here. This Flemish engraver, Anton Wierix, has turned the angel into boy Jesus, who is flanked by Mary and Joseph. And boy Jesus has turned into Cupid and is shooting arrows at Teresa, who has already fallen over and has an arrow sticking out of her chest. This emblem signifies is not only that this ecstasy is a form of martyrdom, but it's also spiritual marriage. And you see this engraving gets copied over and over and over again, even in the colonies in South America. This is a painting from 18th century Peru that basically copies Wierix's. It becomes, transfiguration becomes one of the most popular subjects, Catholic art, in the 17th, 18th century. And then Antonio de Pereira, in 1642, takes on the Cupid image a little bit further. Gone are Mary and Joseph. There is child Jesus, Cupid basically, standing on the world, shooting his arrows at Teresa. So this is all about love, right? This is all about martyrdom, spiritual marriage. And it's so un-Protestant. Teresa had visions of all sorts. She got constant visions of Christ. And some of her early confessors told her not to trust these visions, told her that they were demonic visions, and actually ordered her to make an obscene gesture the next time Jesus appeared, because he was the devil. So she obeyed, and she gave him the fig, the 16th century version of the middle finger. And according to her account, Jesus says, "Oh, thank you. Thank you for obeying your superior. Now go tell your superior, I'm not the devil." But I think the paper I had the most fun ever writing was my paper on the devil in Luther's Table Talk. And Luther had a very specific way of dealing with the devil, which was to be as crude to the devil as the devil is evil. But Teresa fights the devil off with physical objects, crosses, crucifixes, and holy water. And there she boasts that, she knows she has these instruments, physical instruments, that drive the devil away. She's not afraid of him. I believed I could easily vanquish them all with the aid of the cross, and I said to them, come on now, all of you. I'm a servant of the Lord, and I want to see what you can do to me. In this respect, she's just like Luther, who loved to taunt the devil. Say, well, you can't scare me. But what the devil did to Luther usually was to make him doubt his salvation, remind him of his sins. So Luther would always be crude back to the devil and say really crude things. Just to say, you can't have me. Christ has already saved me. I can say the most awful things to you, and it's okay. And Teresa's death, she died from a hemorrhage, was interpreted as an extreme mystical ecstasy. That her soul was ripped from her body so violently that it caused her to bleed to death. So actually, she didn't die of natural causes. She died of supernatural causes. And she had explained this earlier, that levitating, she explained it this way. When you're in one of these ecstasies, you get pulled up towards heaven. But what happens is your soul gets pulled up towards heaven, and your body follows. This was the ultimate ecstasy. But it doesn't end there. Then her body refuses to decompose. And as had been happening through the Middle Ages, they cut her up and send pieces of her here and there you have the arm, there you have the heart. But this body will not decompose. And not only that, it smells wonderful. And it oozes this miraculous oil that heals people. Not Protestant. One of her hands ends up playing a role in 20th century history. It's captured during the Spanish Civil War by the communists, who take it not knowing what it was because the reliquary was encrusted with jewels. But the fascist army rescues the hand. And then for the remainder of his life, Francisco Franco took it everywhere with him. He never parted with the hand. Ever. And one time, on a winding mountain road, the door of the back seat of the car opened. And he almost fell out. But he had the hand next to him. And for the rest of his life, he credited the hand with having saved him. A student in one of my classes, when I was telling the story, he raised his hand and said, Mr. Eire, Mr. Eire, maybe the hand opened the door. The hand is now no longer in the Franco family. It's been given back to the Carmelite nuns. Okay. Person number 2, very quickly, Giuseppe Deza, St. Joseph of Cupertino, 1603 to 1663. A Franciscan who is the most extreme levitator in not just Catholic history, but perhaps world history. He levitated constantly and extremely. As a matter of fact, levitated so much that the Franciscans kept moving him to ever more remote places because he was such a distraction. We have so many hundreds of accounts of his levitations. To the left, you see him levitating when he's finally moved to his last remote spot, which is near the shrine of Loreto in northern Italy, which is supposedly the house that Jesus grew up in Nazareth. Anyway, he gets there and he sees the house. He sees the shrine, and he levitates, and captured in this painting. And he levitates when he meets Pope Urban VIII. Floats above his head. And let me pause for a second. These are miracles. You might say, oh, well, of course, this is only for like simple people, simple, unlettered peasants and tradesmen or whatever. No, this is the Pope we're talking about, who says, and it's recorded, if this man dies before I do, I'll make sure he's canonized very quickly. The Pope believes he sees him above his head. He levitated while he said Mass and would stay up there for a long time. And there you have two instances of him levitating in front of course, witnesses, other people, saying Mass. Or once he laid his hand on a young man who had mental problems. And up he goes. But he takes the young man with him as he goes up. Again, more of this very strange phenomenon of bringing things up with you when you go up. And by the way, every time, we have all the records, every time he went up, Joseph would let out a little whoop. So I'm not making this up. They would hear him say, whoop. Nature could make him have an ecstasy. Once he saw a lamb, reminded him of the Lamb of God, and whoop, up he goes. And when he was at Assisi, one time there was a Lutheran Saxon prince, one of the many princes named Johann Frederick. What was he doing in Italy, this Saxon prince? Not sure. I haven't gotten to the bottom of this yet. But anyway, Joseph flies from one end of the nave to the other, right over this Saxon prince, who immediately converts to Catholicism and loses his place in the Saxon ruling family as a result. So he's credited with this conversion. And the prince supposedly remarked, you know, I never had any problem with my faith till I came here. Probably added, came here to this damn place. And if you want to see one of the worst films ever made, ever, The Reluctant Saint with Maximilian Schell as Joseph of Cupertino. And, I think it's Fernando Lamas?
Ricardo Montalban.
Ricardo Montalban, yes, Rich Corinthian letter. I'm sure some of you remember those commercials. Yes. Person number 3. Same exact years, almost, to the year as Joseph Cupertino. 1602, 1665. And she's our last example of, you know, bodies that defy nature in so many ways. There's Agreda, where she lived her entire life because at age 15, her parents separated. Her father and brothers went to a monastery in Burgos, and she and her sister and mother remained at home and turned the house into a Franciscan convent. And then she never left. But from Agreda, she was a missionary to the native peoples in what is today eastern New Mexico and western Texas. The miracle of bilocation, of being in two places at the same time. And this supposedly happened to her while she was in mystical ecstasy. The nuns saw her in Agreda, but she was in a trance. And during this time, supposedly, she was also in West Texas, telling the Humano people about Christ and salvation, the Catholic Church, all these wonderful things. And she did it supposedly over 500 times, and I've done the calculations there. She would have 2,640,000 frequent flyers. But of course, she doesn't fly. She just miraculously appears at the other end. And in the Southwest, there are all sorts of folk legends about the so-called Lady in Blue, because she belonged to a branch of the Franciscan order. The habits were kind of bluish gray. So, how do we know about this? Well, what happened? How do these Humano natives explain all this? I'll get to that in a minute. But here is an embroidery by Sor Maria de Agreda of the flora and fauna she saw in the New World. And she has very vivid descriptions of everything that she saw over there. And now, of course, eventually a mission is established there, and the mission is still standing there. Franciscan missionaries who were coming up from Mexico to New Mexico encounter these people who supposedly tell them, oh, you don't need to tell us about Jesus. We know all about him. The lady in blue has told us everything. We want to be baptized. They actually, these Humana people supposedly show up at a Franciscan mission saying, you need to baptize us right away. And of course the Franciscans say, no, you need instruction first. And they say, we don't need instruction. The lady in blue has already told me. And they get tested and they pass all the tests. They know their very rudimentary salvation history. This account is printed. Conversión milagrosa de la nación humana. The miraculous conversion of the Humana people. This book makes the rounds. Is read by King Philip IV, who, in one of his many battles with King Louis XIV of France, is on his way to the north of Spain, the Pyrenees. He goes out of his way to visit Agreda and visit with Sor Maria. He needs to meet this woman. And he does. He meets her. This is a 19th century rendition of Lady in Blue. The king and Sor Maria strike up a correspondence. Again, we're not talking about peasants here believing stupid, silly things. This is the king of Spain. At this point in history, the wealthiest and still almost most powerful king in Europe. They start a correspondence. They write over 300 letters to each other, and he bears his soul to her, uses her as a confessor of sorts. Of course, a confessor who cannot absolve him of his sins. But he confesses his deepest dark sins to her and seeks her advice on court issues, policy issues, and so on. 300 letters, and they look like this. Philip writes on the left side, she responds on the right side. And we have these. And they've been published, actually printed and published in Spanish. But that's not all. So Maria de Agreda also has visions of the Virgin Mary, who appears to her numerous times. And the Virgin Mary dictates her autobiography to Sor Maria. And Sor Maria takes it all down. I'll spare you some of the very interesting details just for the sake of brevity here, because I don't want to run out of time. I want to leave time for questions. This autobiography of the Virgin Mary adds up to 1 million words. And it is immense and very detailed. And it goes all the way from the life of Mary's parents, Anna and Joachim, to the point where Mary passes away, doesn't really die, is assumed into heaven. The title of this work is The Mystical City of God, Mística Ciudad de Dios. And there you have a painting of Sor Maria taking dictation from the Virgin Mary. That's one of the earlier editions. Notice how many volumes. And what's in here is truly remarkable. She has obviously read some apocryphal early Christian literature like the Proto-Evangelion of James. She has all kinds of stories about Mary's childhood that come from there, and stories about Jesus' childhood come from there. But there are other things in there that nobody can trace any source. Right? And Mary reveals many things, including the fact that Mary, Virgin Mary, knew exactly what her role was going to be. And when she says yes to the angel to conceive, she knows exactly how much pain she is in for and how much pain her son is in for. So when she says yes, it's a very, very serious yes. She knows what's going to be involved. In essence, to cut to the quick, throughout this mystical city of God, two arguments keep being made by the Virgin Mary. One is that she was conceived without original sin, a teaching that was disputed at the time and is not made official Catholic doctrine until the 19th century. The second point is Mary is co-redemptrix of the human race. Because of this yes, she knew exactly what the suffering was to be. And she willingly brings the Savior into the world. Now you might ask yourselves, okay, wait a minute. Okay, she has this bodily thing that she's in two places at the same time, but this seems a little bit extreme. Because what about the Bible? I mean, this is as counter sola scriptura as you can get. Because in this narrative, among many things I could point out to you, I think one of the more interesting is that after Jesus ascends to heaven, in this account, the person who runs the early church is Mary, not Peter, not any of the 12 apostles. Mary is very much in charge. Right? And hardly any work has been done on this. You know, where's she getting this? Where does this come from? How was this book received? The theological faculty of the Sorbonne in Paris condemns the book. And here's the condemnation. It gave more weight to the revelations alleged to have been received than to the mystery of the Incarnation. It adduced new revelations which the apostles themselves could not have supported. It attributed to Mary the government of the church. It designated her in every respect the mother of mercy and mediatrix of grace, and pretended that St. Anne had not contracted sin in her birth, besides a number of other imaginary and scandalous assertions. But other university faculties approved the book, including, of course, all the Spanish universities. The University of Toulouse, which is very close to Spain, and the University of Rouen, which is under Spanish control. But this condemnation from Paris put a sudden stop to her canonization procedure. She makes it to be venerable, but after the condemnation in Paris, she never makes it to blessed, much less to saint. A cloud of suspicion will hang over this. Point being, yes, you can have these very extreme and very counter-Protestant miracles, but there are limits to what the officials of the Catholic Church will put up with when it comes to these very extreme things. By the way, Teresa of Avila is hounded by the Inquisition. And even after her death, and even after her works are already published, you have Dominican friars accusing her of heresy. Catholics don't all agree on these things. Maria de Agreda also is investigated by the Inquisition twice during her lifetime. Of course, not after her death, you can't do that. Well, yeah, the writings you can investigate after.
Pope Francis.
Pope Innocent XI censured the book in 1681, then rescinded, and he's the one who proclaims her venerable. Regarding the cause of the books of the nun Mary de Agreda, we have decided to suspend sentence, even though the procedure and practice of this holy office, the Inquisition, would counsel otherwise. So the book becomes kind of okay. Still has a cloud hanging over. In 1729, Pope Benedict XIII reopens the investigation, and some of the indecent passages in there And these indecent passages have to do with the way in which Anna and Joachim had sexual intercourse. They're ascribed to faulty translations, so more of the cloud is taken off the book. In 1854, Pope Pius IX will affirm the Immaculate Conception. Oh, and by the way, just a little tidbit, right? To give you the sense of the detail in this autobiography of the Virgin Mary. The virgin birth is explained in the following manner. Jesus' physical body, of course, was also divine. And just as he could walk through walls and locked doors after the resurrection, he just simply went through her body in and out while she remained a virgin. And actually, it's a very funny scene because there are two angels waiting at the other end of the room to receive little infant Jesus as he comes shooting out of Mary's body. And I'm not making light of this, don't get me wrong, but this is the kind of detail that upset the theological faculty at the Sorbonne. Like Teresa of Avila, her body is incorrupt. Same for Joseph of Cupertino. All these great saints who have these physical bodily things, their bodies refuse to decompose. And I'll end with this. This is the English translation of The Mystical City of God, available from a very conservative Catholic publishing house, Tan Publishers. And it is sanctioned by Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, who ended up being Vatican Secretary of State and actually ended up being caught in multiple scandals, including the banking scandal and the most recent sexual abuse scandal. But anyway, he says, please be assured that at the present time, there is no condemnation or restriction issued by ecclesiastical authorities in regard to this book. So it's okay to read it. The Catholic Church always makes a distinction between revelation that's made directly by God and private revelations that people might receive. It's a very useful distinction, which don't have to be believed by everyone in the church. So anyway, in closing, this is powerful polemics if you view it from the perspective of how different it is from Protestantism as an argument of, well, you want to see the divine and supernatural, well, look at all this. And I think there are many factors that made the world modern, our word modern. There are many factors that made the world secular. You know, the secular culture in which we all live and move and have our being nowadays. Where does that come from? There are various things that led to this, but I think this is a sign of resistance. A sign of very, very strenuous resistance against this loss of the intermingling of the supernatural and the natural. And of course, Protestants were on the side of what we might consider the path to demystifying, or as Weber put it, demagicking the world. But not entirely. I'll end with this wonderful paper I had from a student at the Divinity School on these Moravian women in 18th century, early 19th century North Carolina. There's a Lutheran connection and also a radical connection in these Moravian women who are having visions of Christ and actually drinking his blood, drinking blood from the wound in his side. All of this stuff comes back into branches of the Protestant family in different ways, including faith healing. The idea that miracles stop with the last apostle is, in some circles in Protestant churches, also resisted. miracles do make a way back in various ways, but never, ever in this extreme fashion. So I'll end it there and leave some time for